privilege in the canon law of the Roman Catholic Church is the legal concept whereby someone is exempt from the ordinary operation of the law over time for some specific purpose. Definition: papal privileges resemble dispensations, since both involved exceptions to the ordinary operations of the law. But whereas dispensations exempt some person group from legal obligations binding on the rest of the population, a class to which they belong, privileges bestowed a positive favor not generally enjoyed by most people. Quote, thus licenses a teacher to practice law or medicine, for example, were legal privileges, since they confer upon recipients the right to perform certain functions for pay, which the rest of the population not. Privileges differed from dispensations in that dispensations were for one time, while a privilege was lasting. Yet, such licenses might also involve what should properly be termed dispensation, if they waived the canon law requirement that an individual hold a particular qualification to practice law or medicine, as, for example, a degree. The distinction between privilege and dispensation was not always clearly observed, and the term dispensation rather than privilege was used, even when the nature of the act made it clearly a privilege. Indeed, medieval canonists treated privileges and dispensations as distinct, though related, aspects of the law. Privileges and indults were both special favors. Some writers hold that the former are positive favors, while indults are negative. The Pope might confer a degree as a positive privilege in his capacity as a temporal sovereign, or he might do so by way of dispensation from the strict requirements of the canon law. In both cases his authority to do so was found in the canon law. The Pope's powers as a temporal sovereign are recognized in the Roman Catholic Code of Canon Law of 1983. In practice, matters of education are dealt with through the hierarchy of the Church, rather than through that of Vatican City-State, the residual part of the Papal States. Academic degrees. In some instances petitioners sought an academic degree because without one they could not hold a particular office. Canons of certain cathedrals and Westminster Abbey were still required to be degree holders until recent times. The Dean of Westminster Abbey was required to be a doctor, a Bachelor of Divinity, as recently as the late 20th century. In these cases, conferring the status of a graduate is the granting of a privilege, in that the recipient has received a positive favor not generally enjoyed by most people, but it also acted as a dispensation with the requirements of the canon law. Still, however, they were justified. In canon law, the conferral of degrees, a degree status, gave substantial and substantive rights and privileges, and were not merely empty honors. In the event of degree status being conferred, the recipient was not deemed to hold the degree in question, but would enjoy any privileges which might be attached to such a degree, including qualification for office. Conferring the degree itself would mean that the recipient enjoyed the style and not merely the privileges of a degree. They might also, for example, be thereafter admitted or incorporated to the same degree at Unedom, at Oxford, or Cambridge, though few seem to have been so distinguished. It was, however, often difficult to be certain whether the degree itself, or merely its status and privileges, which was being conferred, given the ostensible purpose of the papal dispensatory jurisdiction. It would perhaps be more logical to view all of these degrees as strictly degree status, and not substantive degrees. But the medieval, if not indeed modern, concept of the degree is of a grade of status. One achieves the status of master or doctor, which is conferred by one's university. It is not an award, but the recognition of a certain degree of learning. It is perhaps significant that in the records of the Court of Faculties, the early Lambeth degrees are described in terms of dispensation to enjoy the privilege of DCL, or whatever the degree might be. The exercise of the authority to confer such a privilege was often a positive step by the Pope to emphasize his spiritual, if not temporal, authority. During the 15th century, attempts were made in England to restrict the exercise of papal power in opposition to the Statute of Provisos, to evade the disabilities imposed by that act on non-graduates. It became usual towards the end of the century for those clerics not educated at English universities to obtain dispensations from Rome, including, in a few cases, degrees. These were positive favors not generally enjoyed by most people, and that they were dispensing with the requirements of the canon law was a secondary consideration. They were also exercised for the good of the individual as well as the good of the Church.